I never dreamt or planned that this book would appear in print again. It wasn't on my radar whatsoever, and I mean that. And so the end of last summer, when I had an email from a young minister in London explaining that he'd just come back from holiday in Northern Ireland. His father-in-law is a minister in the Presbyterian Church of Ireland, a good man, and the last 2 days of the holiday he'd finished all his holiday reading. Well, what an ideal minister he is. And so he was looking for something quite small to read. So he was searching through the bookshelves of his father-in-law and came across this one, The Wrath of God. So he sat down, told his wife that he wouldn't be looking after the children that afternoon, and read it through. And then when he got home, he emailed me and said, you must get this reprinted. And he gave me 2 conditions. 1, you mustn't expand it, and 2, you must make it clear it was originally given to ministers in Bala. You mustn't expand it, he said, because we younger ministers, we like to read short books, and we can read them in 2 or 3 hours. And I thought, well, times have changed a little. Anyway, I wasn't sure what to do. And I thought and thought and prayed about it. And then I decided, yes, if the press agreed to it, we'd go ahead. But on condition that I could edit it, update it, and also expand it in terms of 2 chapters. Now, this minister in London said, don't you dare expand it, because we don't want a big book. And I said, well, if there's no expansion, there's no book coming out. So he accepted that, and what I've done is to update it. Some of the references were quite dated, and introduce 1 or 2 later ones, and also get rid of some typos. You may discover 1 or 2 more now, and also included 1 chapter where, I don't know if John Legg was present, in the Westminster Conference in the early 90s, where I spoke on our Lord's teaching and the way in which he handled the teaching of the wrath of God and hell. And it's amazing that the major references to hell in the New Testament are all coming from the lips of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's assumed in the rest of the New Testament, but it's our Lord Jesus Christ who emphasizes it. And one hears very little about the way in which our Lord handled it. And I find it very helpful, and I've included that brief chapter. And then, looking at the manuscript, I thought there's something missing. And while the gospel comes through, I thought we must have a final chapter on the gospel. I don't know if you know, what's the title of it? Lloyd Jones has a series of sermons on Galatians 6:14. God forbid I should glory. Is it God's way of salvation? Cross-worthy. Outstanding. Really good gospel preaching. And he himself had remarked that he had great liberty in preaching at that time in Westminster Chapel. And one of those sermons particularly, he really opens his heart out, and he takes you to the heart of the cross and of the gospel in such a moving way. I thought, well, there's no better way of ending the book by summarizing that message I didn't steal it, I summarised it, and I haven't given readers the name of the preacher either, because some readers, as soon as I mention Lloyd Jones, you turn them off. And so it's just a footnote, but that's a good book if you come across it second hand or buy it first hand. And that's the final chapter. So there are changes from the original one. If you're asking me, should I get it? Well, I'm not the right one to answer the question. But this is more readable, the later one. The chapters are brief. There's study questions at the end of each chapter. And one or two pastors in England who've reviewed them have got stuck on the questions, and they're still working on them, so it's a good discipline. And then the expansion of the two chapters, etc. Now, before I hand over to Keith, perhaps I can just mention this one, the background, because I think it was 1974, a year before I moved up to Bangor, North Wales. One of the men in the church had recently been converted, and he'd read John Wenham's Goodness of God, now Enigma of Evil. And he said, "Pastor, I finished with it and you can have it." Well, I took it, and like some books I have, I put them on the shelf to be read later on. It was when I was up in Bangor about 3 or 4 years later that I actually began to read it, and I was horrified. The opening chapter, where Wenham puts doubt on the whole doctrine of eternal punishment and favours annihilation, conditioned immortality, and that really disturbed me. It was the first occasion for IVP to publish a work or a chapter in a work that undermined that doctrine. I'm not saying there weren't brief references in other works, but this was a major one. The rest of the book was quite good. And that's the subtlety of it. A lot of good material was spoiled by that opening chapter. I can then move you forward a year or so, a ministers' committee in Bala, planning the 81 ministers' conference. And I'm silly really, because I know the rules, and if you say a lot in committee, you're landed with the work. I know it well. And sometimes I shut my mouth and I let others sort it out. But on this occasion, they were asking what theme it should be handled. We'd already had Douglas Macmillan on justification. We felt that was key in the work of evangelism. And then, how should we follow that up? And I just shared about Wenham's book, and there was a fair amount of blessing in evangelism in the 60s, 70s, and before, but people were being saved, churches were being reformed and planted. So what was the gospel, and why do people need to be saved? And as we shared this, and I elaborated, they began to ask, well, who should speak? And names were given, and no one responded. And you have those quiet moments in the committee where everyone looks at you, and they smile at you, like you know the experience. And they sort of nod. And so the suggestions come, well, Eryl Davies, you will do it. Well, I agreed to do it. And June 81 was the first Bala conference after the death of Lloyd Jones. So it was a somber occasion. But the ministers received it well, and they wanted to be published. And so it came out in 1984. That's a bit of the history. But just quickly to tell you that in November '85, I was over in Northern Ireland for a few days at the request of the Evangelical Fellowship of Evangelicals there. And they'd arranged 1 or 2 conferences on this subject. And I remember in an Anglican church in a country area, County Armagh, preaching the gospel in the evening, and they'd given me strict orders: preach on the doctrine of hell, and preach for 1.5 hours. An Anglican church. I'd never done it before. Not in an Anglican church, but 1.5 hours. Honestly, I haven't done that before. And I arrived at the rectory, and the godly man, the rector, he said to me, "Remember, you're preaching for 1.5 hours on the doctrine of hell and make the gospel clear." Yeah, okay. I got to the parish church and into what I would call a vestry, and the church warden comes in. "Reverend," he said, "you're preaching for 1.5 hours." So I got the message. And then I was told that half the congregation would be Roman Catholics. And they wouldn't be converted, and some of their own people were not converted. So amazingly, I preached for 1.5 hours, and they listened well. And around about 10:15, it was a late start to the service. I didn't start at 6 o'clock. About 10:15, I was at the door with the rector. And I said to him, "Why are all those people still sitting down in the church?" "Oh," he said, they're our people." And there they were, sort of parents and younger children. Do you know what he told me? "My people don't leave the church when the gospel is preached until they've prayed over it, and then they go home." And I thought that was a salutary message. And we're going to leave them. We're going to the rectory. 1 or 2 priests, he said, or rectors were going to join us for supper. But that was quite an experience. The downside of that, and then I will finish, is that in January '86, those of you who were born and around at that time, I wrote an article for E.T., Everlasting Punishment. The Irish people asked me to do it, and I was amazed, the response, the letters, the phone calls, readers disagreeing with what I'd written on eternal punishment. And all the criticisms were from England, I'm glad to say, but from evangelical churches and evangelical groupings. And over the following period, probably 5, 6, 7 years, I had pastors phoning me from England to the college. What can we do? Because some of our deacons want to change our doctrinal basis and want to allow for conditional immortality, and they're not happy with the doctrine of hell as we have taught it. And I may be overstating the case, but I felt that we were losing the war in that sense. That a number of evangelicals had abandoned the traditional biblical teaching on hell. That's one reason why I agreed to the republishing of the book. So the book is important. I'm not saying that's why you should buy it, but pray you know, that the message of the doctrine of God, that the wrath of God, final judgment, and the penal satisfaction which our Lord offered on the cross for our sin, and that these doctrines will be honoured. And that in evangelism we will not be afraid to speak of the wrath of God and the doctrine of hell itself.